Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome an accomplished professional from the world of human resources from India, Mr. Joyful Ranga. Ranga, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Pranams. It's wonderful. And thank you so much for thinking of me and inviting me to this show.
Thank you. Ranga is a corporate trainer and a life coach. So before we start talking about corporate training, tell me about your own journey in brief.
Yeah. It's a long story. To cut the long story short, I'm actually not from the human resources field. I have my degrees in mathematics and computer science. Started off as a software engineer. Like anyone else, had the dream to go to US and settle down in a software job. So I was working for an organization in Mumbai. So that's when I kind of experienced a very interesting transformation in me when a World Bank report positioned India relatively in a low position on leadership. And something really made me feel pretty bad about it. And so I thought, why can't I do something about it? And I had a mentor who told me, just like how a squirrel kept throwing small stones into the ocean, you should do something about it than just feeling, intensely about it. So, so I quit the corporate and started a training organization with my wife, Meena. And I wanted to build people leaders for India. And she wanted to build technology leaders for India. And that's how the whole journey started. It started in the year 1994.
Yeah. Wonderful. You have worked with very, very senior leaders from all over the world. What do you think is the key to creating a truly transformative leadership development program?
Across the almost 3 decades of my experience, what I have found is leadership is very wide in terms of what it means to different companies, what it means to different people, what it means to different industries, and so on. So when clients invite me to design and deliver a leadership module, there have been occasions when it has not been pretty successful, and there have been occasions when it has been really successful. So to build a transformative leadership program, the key, according to me, is when the organization realizes that an external trainer alone cannot do a magic.
Right.
Let me take an example of culture. It has taken, say, 15, 20 years to build a culture within an organization. You cannot change the culture of an organization through a 2-day offsite. Right? So whenever the organization's top leader and a few of the people around that zone realize that it's a teamwork with the trainer just playing one part. And the other part being played by the organization and the third part being played by the participants. I think when all these 3 pieces, the responsibility they realize, then I think the training program will become exceedingly successful, not otherwise. Second, it's not a journey of just the 2 days or 3 days of the program. I think at the end of the program is where the start happens. So there has to be a continuous opportunity. There has to be continuous reinforcements, little hand-holding, support, coaching. When all this is done together, then I think the transformative leadership program can happen. Yes.
Very interesting. Thank you. And what strategies do you use to foster innovation with visionary thinking in leaders through your programs?
Okay. Leaders learn the best when they experience something.
Correct.
So most of my programs are very experiential in nature. So in fact, many of the leadership programs, I take people to the forest and actually make them take risks rather than talk to them in the class about what risk taking is all about. Or give them certain complex situations that they have to face, which they have not faced at all. Right? Rather than discuss that as a case study in the class, make them actually go through it. This is one thing that I do.
Right.
The second thing that I do is I found in India specifically, people connect to certain areas like movies or cricket as a sport. Right? So I take a lot of leadership lessons from movies. I take legal permission, cut some clips, make them go through those clips and then ask them to analyze what kind of a lesson that they can take from that.
Hmm.
Right? So these things I have found it to be exceedingly effective.
Hmm.
Another method that I use in the class is to put them through situations without telling them what they're going through.
Hmm.
Like suddenly blindfold them and just leave them. No,
Hmm.
they'll be completely lost. I've not given them any instructions,
Yeah.
nothing whatsoever. So everybody is waiting for certain instructions to happen. Then it's much easier for me to communicate that the same is true with people who report to you. They're just waiting for instructions to happen.
Hmm.
Right? So you were blindfolded, but then you had some time in front of you. I mean, you could have decided your own vision and strategy. Instead of that, you kept waiting.
Hmm.
So put people through situations which are unexpected, which is what they're likely to face in real life.
Hmm.
These are some of the methods that
Very interesting. Very.
yeah.
And the other aspect that I thought I'll get your perspective on is how do you help leaders align their personal values with their professional goals to drive purpose-driven leadership?
Yeah, I recall a wonderful quote by Jim Collins, who wrote a very beautiful book called Good to Great, where he
Hmm.
says, you can't install values into people.
Hmm.
They have it, right? So he talks about identifying the right people on the bus. Uh, so many times leaders go through this conflict of having to do certain things which an organization expects them to do vis-a-vis some of the things that they hold near and dear in their system as personal values, right? What I recommend to leaders at that point in time is to go back and align with what they think is deeper in their system as
Hmm.
values rather than align to what professional expectations are,
Hmm.
and identify those contexts where they will shine very well with these kind of values. For
Right.
example, it's highly possible that there may be a leader who's expected to compromise on certain ethical boundaries, particularly in, say, a startup situation when that person is very uncomfortable doing that. Right now, one thing is to compromise, and if you compromise willingly and being aware of it completely, so that you don't carry any guilt on that. Or if it is very uncomfortable, make it very clear and see if you can do some innovative workaround to be able to handle the situation.
Right.
Otherwise, one has to leave the context because
Hmm.
it doesn't gel well with with the person. If I
Hmm.
may be permitted to take an example,
Sure.
when I was working in the corporate, I realized that uh, as one moves up in the hierarchy, uh, the skill to manage politics become a very important skill.
Correct.
And however professional an organization is, because it's a group of people,
Hmm.
so you do get into politicking, and negative competition and unhealthy practices slowly start to creep. And at some point, I felt from a competence angle, I think I would have done it very well. Actually, I was very good. But I know I won't be able to sleep peacefully if I engage in such activities just to, grow faster than someone else.
Hmm.
So that's one of the reasons also why we quit the corporate and said, I think we'll retain our personal values and do what we can do from the consulting perspective.
Hmm.
So that's the
Interesting. Well said. Well said.
perspective. Yeah.
And my next question, Ranga, is what role does emotional intelligence play in your leadership development approach? And how do you integrate this into your training?
Beautiful. I actually talk about three things: IQ, EQ, and spiritual quotient, SQ. Uh, Today, one of the reasons why there is unhealthy practices and unhealthy competition in an organization where somebody is pulling somebody down, etc., is because the leaders in the company they've not focused on building the spiritual energy in the company. Now, when I say spiritualism, it's not religion that I'm talking about. I'm talking about authenticity. I'm talking about compassion, care for each other's growth, feeling the success of someone else as my own success. So certain attributes related to certain divine qualities as the same, or non-discrimination is one of the divine qualities. So when a leader concentrates on building the spiritual energy in the company, then slowly these things start to fall in place. Right. So emotional intelligence and spiritual intelligence, I give equal importance when I'm talking about leadership development. Right. Um, Leadership is not just about setting a vision, right? I mean, it's about carrying a group of people willingly, and they're taking a journey as if it is their own,
Hmm.
right? And at the end of the day, they should also feel they have contributed more than the leader has.
Yeah.
So I think this calls for tremendous amount of connecting to people at a very deep energy level,
Hmm.
and that energy is definitely emotional energy,
Hmm.
right? Which is passion. How do I make people function with a passion towards the job.
Mm.
Now, that passion might result in people giving very hard feedback to the leader himself.
Yeah.
Right, because I'm connected to the vision, and I don't want any decision taken by the leader to be a wrong decision, right?
Mm.
So, how do you foster a climate where people feel trusted, people feel valued, and people feel safe in sharing feedback with each other? And all of this is emotions, right? So, emotional intelligence and spiritual intelligence both are given very equal importance in my session. In fact, I don't want to mention the name of a global organization.
Yeah, we don't want any names, of course.
There is a company where they got all the country heads of around 40 countries into one room. And they asked me to conduct one full day of how do you build spiritual energy in the system. Right? It was one day, and it had people from multiple religions in, and we had an extensive and very, very highly enriched conversation on how do you build that kind of a climate in the company moving forward, because people felt it was kind of going down the drain because of that. Yeah.
Well said. Ranga, when I was reading about you and preparing for my conversation, I was also fascinated to learn that you blend ancient wisdom with modern leadership. So I want to ask you the next few questions related to some of the ancient wisdom we have in our Indic scriptures.
Yes.
And my first question in this area is, what parallels do you see between the principles of Vedanta and the challenges faced by today's corporate leaders?
Okay. There are many lessons that one can draw from Bhagavad Gita, because there are Arjunas everywhere, right? I mean, people who are confused after setting a vision that I want to do this, and then when they're actually launching onto that, and they get confused as to whether should I do this, should I not do this.
Right.
So starting from that confusion that people undergo on a daily basis, to be able to set a huge goal which is far beyond you, and to be able to reach that goal being beyond the company's vision, going into the purpose as to why we exist. So in many aspects, I see a lot of parallels between what Vedanta can teach and what corporate management and leadership can be. Right? To take a very simple example, the small act, that's what people say, it's a small act, but according to me, it's a very huge act of, say, Rama acknowledging the squirrel's contribution in the whole journey, if you see. And Rama took the squirrel on the hand and moved 3 fingers on it, and which appears as 3 lines on the squirrel. The way I connect it is, I tell leaders that the 3 lines represent 3 important concepts of leadership. The first one is, how do you have a keen observation of what people are contributing?
Right.
Right. I mean, many times leaders only know what is projected to them. Today, people are showcasing a lot more than what they're doing. Right. And how, as a leader, I create system to find out the smallest of contributions which are adding huge value to the organization. So the first line represents keen observation. The second line represents an instant acknowledgement. When you don't postpone it to end of the year appraisal, right? I mean, you see a good act being done, and how can I acknowledge it that day? In fact, the company where I was working earlier, they had that. If they find an employee going a little away from his defined role and doing something good for the organization, they will give an award at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Okay. So the second line on the squirrel represent instant acknowledgement. The third line is, how do I give a lasting recognition? Right. I mean, it's not just about calling that person and saying, hey, good job done. Now, how do I create in that person a memory that is very long lasting? In the case of squirrel, they say one squirrel did it, and all the squirrels seem to have benefited out of that. Right. So how do you give a lasting recognition? So when you talk about ego, for example, when you connect to the ego of Ravana, or when you talk about professionalism, this is the last example I'll take.
Please
Talk
give
about
example.
professionalism. In Mahabharata, there is a very beautiful story of Sahadeva being an amazing astrologer, and Duryodhana approaches Sahadeva to find out a date when the war has to be started, so that Duryodhana will win. And Duryodhana approaches Sahadeva, who's the enemy. Now here, if you take this interesting situation, what kind of trust that Duryodhana should have had on the professionalism of Sahadeva to reach that person?
Correct.
And second, what level of professionalism Sahadeva has to say, look, he's asking me something related to my profession. I should be honest in giving him an answer. I should not bring in another role and conflict it into something else. Right? So I think somewhere there is a lot of interesting analogies from scriptures that can be brought into corporate management. And one more thing which I do extensively is bringing in Taittiriya Upanishad, the Panchakoshas, where we talk about the 5 layers of a personality as 5 layers of energies which a leader can focus on, and how do you maximize on the Manomaya Kosha, which is emotional energy, and Vijnanamaya Kosha, which is the logical energy. So each of this can be combined very well to leadership, which I have been doing for almost 2 decades now.
Very, very interesting. Great examples, both of them. Thank you. My next question is, how does understanding one's inner self, which is a core tenet of Vedanta, affect decision making and strategic thinking in leadership?
It's a tough question, I would say, but exciting. We cannot lead others if we cannot lead ourselves. Everything starts with self. Right? For example, how is a leader different from a manager? For years together, people have written about it, and articles and papers have been written about it. The only difference, as I see, is a demonstration, living of what you're talking to respect to the rest of the people, right? So when you say living something, it is not demonstrating for the sake of demonstrating. It is actually you becoming that. For example, if I want people to be honest and authentic, I have to be authentic in every cell of my body. I mean, it's not your faked behavior. It should come from deep within, right? So understanding oneself in terms of what is my guna profile. For example, am I a tamasic person? Am I a rajasic person? How does that profile affect the way I interact with the rest of the world? Why am I impatient? Why am I? So asking lots of questions about oneself. And finding answers to that with the help of a coach or a mentor or a guru, and then using that awareness to build an interactive system where I start leading the people. I think that's very, very important in making some of the choices, knowing oneself.
Very interesting.
In Mahabharata, Duryodhana tells Krishna, I know what is dharma, but I'm not able to follow it.
Correct.
I know what is adharma, but I'm not able to stop from doing that.
Yeah.
Right. So I think if you ask me that, and that's self-awareness, right?
Yeah.
Now I think somewhere we need to know, oh, this is what I am and this is what I'm not. And I think that self-awareness really helps an individual to transform into a much, much better leader.
Amazing. Thank you.
Yeah.
My next question is, how can the practice of self-awareness, as taught in Vedanta, help modern leaders navigate complex organizational dynamics?
When we talk about self-leadership, we are talking about a couple of aspects. One is, how large can I actually think? Okay, is my vision limited by certain experiences that I have, certain perceptions that I have? Where is that drawing of the line between what is practical and what is reality vis-a-vis what is unreasonable vision that we can have? So that is one aspect of visioning that can really help a leader navigate complex organizational situations. Second, knowing my limitations. Weakness is different from limitation, right? Weakness can be overcome. Limitation is something that's so innate in me that it's very painful for me to overcome. So knowing my limitations help me in not forcing myself in certain situations and allowing somebody else to take over and maybe solve a situation in the organization. Right. So I think knowing one's own strengths, one's own limitations help in navigating very complex organizational situations, according to me. And without that self-awareness, it's very difficult. And honestly, at a leadership level, feedback is also not very automatic.
Correct.
Because people are very careful about giving you feedback, right? So in the absence of correct feedback coming to me, self-awareness become, self-introspection and self-awareness become a very powerful tool.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So Ranga, I have time for 2 more questions.
Yes.
My next question is, how do you introduce the concept of detachment, which is a very important factor of Vedanta, to leaders in high-stake corporate environments?
Okay. I think one of the things that I do is to do what's called Shabda Jnana. Shabda Jnana is something taught to me by my guru, Puja Swami Dayananda Saraswati ji, that you must know the real deep meaning of a word that we are using. Okay? Many times we are kind of having a perception about the meaning, not really the meaning. So one of those words is detachment. Uh, Very few people with whom I've interacted when I've asked this question, how do you differentiate between detachment and indifference? They find it very difficult to
Yeah.
respond to that question, right? Indifference is a very negative attribute wherein I just don't care, right? But whereas detachment is a very highly active and a very purpose-driven approach to it, but not getting attached to the result of an outcome, right? I mean, so the entire focus is on effort, and a combination of building competency in the rest of the people. So it's a very active situation. But then when the result actually happens, may or may not be in line with what I expected and started.
Right.
How do I respond to that is where the detachment comes into picture, right? So two mindsets I talk about here. One mindset is what is called Ishvara Arpana Buddhi, which is whenever you do something, you do it with as if you are offering to the entire universe. You are not doing it to a person.
Yeah.
Because when we do something to a person, then there's an expectation that the person has to return something to me. So anything you do, whether you're coaching somebody, mentoring somebody, you're building somebody, you're gathering resources for an organization, whatever you do, imagine that you're doing to the whole system. So it's an arpana. Arpana means it's an offering.
Correct.
So Ishvara Arpana Buddhi is one thing. Second is Prasada Buddhi. Prasada Buddhi is I have put in my effort. I've done everything I need to do from my side. Right? Still, if the result is not in line with what I get, I accept that result as a prasada. So when I receive a prasada from a temple, I don't judge it, right? I mean, salt is less, salt is more. He gave the same prasada yesterday. Why is he giving it today? So there's no judgment there. I accept it with reverence. Now, that reverence is very important. So when a result happens which is against what I expected, that may even result in me losing my job as a leader. But have that maturity to accept it with reference and with an introspection, did I miss out something from my side?
Very well said. Well
right.
said.
I think that becomes very important, and that's where the concept of detachment I bring in through these two mindsets: Ishvara Arpana Buddhi and Prasada Buddhi.
Very well said. And my last question for you. Everyone's now suddenly started to realize the importance of so much knowledge we have in Indic scriptures, and everyone's talking about it. What advice would you give to leaders looking to incorporate mindfulness and ancient wisdom into their own leadership styles?
Okay. First of all, I don't think I'm qualified to advise anything to anybody because over the last 2 decades, every leadership program I ended up learning more than possibly they ended up learning because it's such a wide subject.
Yeah.
So what I would request leaders possibly to do is to acknowledge, first of all, that there is so much wisdom and remove some biases that they may have in their mind related to connecting it to certain religion or I found the great leadership wisdom in as much in Christianity, in Islam, and in Sanatana Dharma. So delinking it from religion and looking at it as somebody with such levels of intuition has already thought about the world and so much knowledge is available, and we should be open enough to seek that knowledge without any tag or judgment. Right. And so I would request leaders to kindly acknowledge that there is so much wisdom. And second, expose their people to look at that wisdom in a very, very positive light. And then the whole transformation can truly happen.
Very well said. And on that note, Ranga, I just want to say this has been such an amazing conversation. Thank you for speaking to me about your own journey. Thank you for speaking to me at such length about your own leadership development programs. I think you're doing some amazing work helping organizations and leaders and individuals to transform. Thank you also for talking to me about how you got such deep knowledge of Vedant and how so many principles of Vedanta can be blended into our leadership lessons. I particularly loved your 2 stories about the squirrel And I'm going to repeat the 3 points you gave me about the squirrel for our viewers and listeners. The 3 lines on the back of the squirrel. Squirrel stand for: one is to have keen observation, second has to have instant acknowledgement, and the third one is to have lasting recognition. All three very critical aspects of any relationship in any organization. I also love the story of Sahadev and Duryodhan and the trust that existed between the two of them. And the lesson I took away from your conversation was how important it is for us to remain true to our knowledge
Yes.
and not get biased by anything else that we may have in the back of our minds, which may cloud our judgment. And
Absolutely.
finally, thank you also for your amazing lessons, uh, which you've given for leaders, which is to acknowledge the amazing amount of wisdom, to remove the biases, and to expose our teams to a lot of this wisdom. Thank you again for speaking to me, and good luck to you.
Thank you. I would like to conclude this with my gratitude to my gurus and my teachers. And million thanks to you for giving me this wonderful platform and opportunity.
Thank you.
Om Shri Guru Bhyo Namaha. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ranga. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.